know, it's recording.
Yeah, high pressure steaks. How do we know if the phone's gonna run out of battery?
It has like 70%. It'll be fine.
Okay.
And like you can see, the mic's still working, so
Oh, that's sick.
it should. It'll tell you the levels, but yeah.
Okay. Cool.
So I've done 15-minute videos before, and
Okay.
it's completely fine.
Okay. Cool.
So yeah.
Because this might go for like 5 hours. So.
I mean, we can always stop, restart, go and get some food. I reckon I'll be hungry before we like run out of shit to say.
Okay. Fair enough. Fair enough.
Podcasting, the idea.
Yes. Why are we here?
Yeah. Why are you here?
Why am I here? Curious. Curious because I think since the last time you spoke about the idea of doing a podcast, I was like, oh, I was kind of intrigued. Yeah, just the thought about, because I think like my real motivation is that whenever we get to talk, the chats we have like it can go across like multiple levels. We'll talk about, I don't know, what did you have for breakfast today, or how was your running, to like what is life, or like what do you hope to do next. So I think I find those sort of conversations like really engaging. So that's why I'm here today.
Yeah.
On a public holiday.
So it's like, like you've dragged me into like your office. You're like, this is a public holiday. I want to feel like I'm doing more work on a public holiday.
Yeah, well.
But it's like, it's more so the podcast and the idea of having an engaging conversation.
Yes.
Like, the range of the ability of what we're able to discuss or talk about. It's like a fascinating concept of like what makes a podcast, what makes it interesting. What makes two people engaging, or like the idea of concept engaging, and even if it gets to the point in like, you know, a couple of years or whatever, something never really builds up or comes from it, but it's sort of like the practice of going and doing something that you actually enjoy doing.
Yeah. I think one of the things I've learned from making blogs on the internet is that they kind of become like artifacts. Like digital artifacts of the person that I was like at that particular point of time. So whenever I read the stuff I've posted like 5 years ago, I'm like, who is this guy? Like, you know, just so and that thought is like a interesting way to reflect on progress.
Do you really feel like it's that much of a different person to like who you were 5 years ago, or it's as if you were to meet them in somebody else's shape, you'd be like, who the fuck is this? Even though they were once a version of yourself.
It feels very foreign. Yeah, it's almost like when I read my old posts, I'm like reading about someone else. Then, so it doesn't click in my head that I'm reading what I wrote previously. It's more like I'm reading about this guy called Julian. Because and practically, right? Like whenever I write something, I kind of use that as a tool to like purge my brain of what I was trying to think about, and then so I'll like reflect on particular questions or particular memories and kind of like purge that. So I'm like, oh, I get to free my mind of that stuff. So when I read it again, I'm like, oh, that happened, right?
So like when you say like purge your mind, that feels like it's like warts or like something that's just like coming out of you, like bad shit.
Yeah. As
opposed to, is it like a concept that you're nutting out, or like a perspective or a belief that you were holding at that time, that you're like, I don't want to think about this anymore, as opposed to an idea or concept that you hope to be consistent at some point in the future, an idea that might transcend years perspective?
I think so far anyway, like the utility of writing has been for that purging aspect of it. It's kind of like got all this, let's say one way to phrase it is like all this garbage floating around, and like the way to process through that garbage and kind of like look for the gems is through writing about it. So that helps keep the rest of my mind free.
Yeah. It's sort of like it's really like almost like going for a run or clearing your head, or like finding some way to filter out and like cut off some of the stuff that isn't quite working. And like almost like a factory process or something where there's got to be some like roughage or some like disposable stuff that you've got to cut off that are part of the process of creating a final product.
Yes.
Almost like a mold. we're not really a mold, but
yeah, like I guess if we're talking about like manufacturing terms, like whenever you create a quality product, there'll always be some inefficiency that creates like, let's say, reject product. Like, so you'll have like, I don't know, some conversion efficiency of like, oh, you get your desired stuff, but as part of creating the desired stuff, you will always produce some waste.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's like I think it's with any sort of business or any sort of idea there's like a lot of error or failure or some negative aspects. Like there's no 100% waste-free business. Whether that's ideas, concepts, time, that like everything makes sense and is achievable almost. Even though I feel like in my work a lot of the time it's like that shouldn't exist or never exists. Like the human error code is almost like something that you should try to eliminate, as opposed to accept that is a part of the process, part of how you create something, almost.
I wonder then, what would it look like to kind of strive for no waste? Like, would that be useful?
I think it would feel more useful than what it's probably necessary, in the sense of like any new idea or new creation, from the idea of like solar power or wind, because that's the idea that comes to, of like zero waste emissions and like, you know, burning coal and stuff like that. There was like inevitable waste in the process of getting to the capacity to be able to create these ideas. Like there would be so many bad inventions of wasted metal or materials, stuff like that, to then create the product, let alone making it industrial in the sense of to create multiple aspects of this around the world. And so I think like there's a natural consequence even from like beans or something like that, that like you eat the peas out of the beans and there's the shell left.
Yeah.
That there is some form of waste in everything, but that you've got to appreciate that that part creates the thing that you're really looking for.
Maybe it depends on like where you're at in terms of like the life cycle of things. Like maybe when, let's say, you're developing a new process, you're not really maybe it's not as important to care about how efficient the process is, because you're just getting started and it's all about like trying different things. And like this plays out in like early stage companies as well, of like the saying is move fast and break stuff, right? You're out there trying to find the right fit, and then as the company matures or the idea takes off, then you can start thinking about like, oh, I've got this money making machine, then I can care about, oh, how do I make it more efficient? But you can't really, it's kind of like climbing Maslow's hierarchy of needs, of like, oh, I gotta put food on the table first before I can think about like, oh, what's the meaning of my life?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. Like it is very much, I think that's a great perspective of where something is in terms of its life cycle, or where you're at in terms of what you can waste.
Yeah.
Like once you've been in a company or something for ages and it's just a process and it's just keep ticking it over. And so like, it's like business is boring. It's kind of the idea that nothing should be changing or nothing should be doing anything different, more or less, as opposed to breaking stuff, making errors in the start of something. That you should be failing a lot to figure out what works and what doesn't. And I think there's probably not a point necessarily, if you come back to maybe life, where you want to get to that point of maintenance as like a life, maybe in a business, but like in your day to day of like just refining the process. So it's like 7 o'clock I wake up, I don't miss my alarm. 7:02 I've had my coffee. 7:03 straight into the bathroom. Oh my god, this whole process is like missed. Like I feel like, me personally, that isn't a life that is enjoyable or fulfilling.
It made me think about like how do you find the balance of like always questioning everything on one hand, and then on the opposite end of that spectrum is like being, let's say a crude way to put it, is like being comfortable with where you're at.
I wish I had the optimum solution for you. I would feel a lot easier.
Yeah.
I think it's like the realization of the ability to question everything is, I feel, quite useful in the sense of that you don't get complacent. You don't settle for things, or like you're ongoingly curious about what's going to happen, like how things are going to work, or how things are going to function, or can you improve something, or make something better, or like try and change from where you're at. But I think when I find I constantly change and have these new ideas and new concepts, I don't really know what it is that I want because I'm so curious. And so I probably get lost in the doubt and the curiosity and the insignificance, knowing completely that nothing is what it seems. Like, best example is like mindset, mental health, mental toughness, whatever that is, that there is like no hard proof idea or technology of this is how we do things. That is like a known concept that we're just figuring out a lot of things, but there is no hard science as to like basically the opposite of how to run a marathon physically. There is like that many people that have run it that it's almost like a scientific process of you've got to do these sort of things to kind of get there. I think the curiosity helps to develop yourself and others, but I don't think it limits your ability to be confident in who you are or what you truly believe in. And then when you do find those things, you probably are a bigger believer when you do get there.
Wow, that's interesting.
What do you feel like, because you're like innately as curious as I am, do you feel like the curiosity helps to make like life, the word comes to mind is like fulfilling, or like, is there another word, idea?
I wish, what do I wish? I wish I could say that curiosity is nice to have, but to me it's more like it's so ingrained where I have no other choice but to do that, and because of that, it kind of, there's consequences to every approach or any sort of like decision or pathway you take, but I think the like curiosity is so ingrained in how I like to see the world, where I can't really, maybe the shell is so hard where it's hard to see any other way of approaching the world. So one of the things I really like about conversations and like meeting different people is like, oh, like through conversation I get to meet different people who have different lenses of looking at the world. For me, I approach it in that curiosity, open mindset sort of thing. But I also, I guess, part of being curious is like being curious enough to know that that perspective might break. And that's why I like meeting new people. And so I'm also curious about like, what are the shadow elements of being curious? And I think if I question it deep enough, like underneath all of that curiosity is like the inability or the want to not be too comfortable or complacent. So I think that's where a lot of the energy comes from. Framing it as curiosity is probably a polite way to put it. The unpolite way to put it is like being constantly dissatisfied.
Yeah, it's tough to feel constantly dissatisfied. I think the one thing I come back to and like find hard to sit on is this idea of when you're doing some sort of personal development or exploring your own self, is like you don't necessarily have this fulfilling point or this point where you're just content. That it's like, is this what somebody really wants to live like? You know, like that consistently dissatisfied or consistently curious, or like can see everything that they don't know, and so you're searching for everything you don't know without realizing that you probably know way more than what other people would, and that a lot of people are probably very content. I was going to say too content with who they are or where they are in the world, but I don't think I'd want to lose the curiosity of the world, or like asking questions, or trying to make something better.
Yeah.
But it's also like a scary concept to kind of roll out another 10, 20, 40 years and be like, you might never just be content and happy and like appreciative of what you've got.
Do you ever see like glimmers of that, like, or it's just 0%?
I think there are definitely glimmers. Like glimmers is probably a great word because it doesn't hang around for long.
And then it's gone.
Yeah, it's like, no, you see me, no, you don't. I think it's the ability to see limitations that you feel like are worth exploring. In the sense of doing that 100-mile run like 3 years ago, I was like, I could see the limitations of it and go, why am I doing this? And it was the first time I did it. And like, usually when you get to that point, people want to continue or keep going down that path. But there was a point where I was like, I honestly don't see the value in doing it. But I see other people that have to go back and back and back to try and learn or see the limitation of what they're doing, and appreciate the curiosity and obsession to continually do it. Mind you, like I came back to it 3 years later, but like,
well, we're back.
Yeah, it's like this discontent of maybe looking at something else or trying to figure out, is that all life is?
Have there been, let's say, chapters in your life where you feel like the curiosity engine was switched off at all?
I think a lot in my early years, without realizing it. I don't think I was incredibly curious. I think like for me it was like a lot of accepting that this is the way it is, and like taking everything, just what anybody said, as gospel, and not questioning anything. Like I was very much a believer in school and the system of the way stuff is.
Right.
In the sense of, oh, you do math, this is how it is. Like there was no creativity, there was no thing of like, the only way to succeed at life is to be good at school. Like there was no idea around businesses, entrepreneurship, or like anything else outside of what the world was at that stage.
Right.
To go, there is a world after school and uni, and how people make money, or that there is meaning or philosophy or psychology. Have you always been curious?
No. There are clear milestones in my personal life where things had sort of shifted, for better or worse. Like when you switch curiosity on, it's hard to turn off. And yeah, there was a time, I guess chapters in my life where I was less curious or less driven by curiosity.
And then what, do you feel like they were good times or better times?
Depends on how you define good, because like I think before, if I think of who I was before, let's say I became curious enough to start questioning things, I think I was largely like operating in the dark, almost like kind of not true. Yeah, I mean, one way to say it is like not really being sure of who I was. And even today, I'm not sure of who exactly I am, but at least I'm trying every single day. Each hour I'm alive, I'm trying to figure out that question. But before, it was kind of like, oh, people are telling me what to do, what to wear, what I should eat, how should I spend my time, and largely operating on like impulse. Like, oh, I like playing video games, so I'm gonna do that. Like no one was really there, or like including myself. I wasn't watching myself, let alone like other people watching me to like kind of guide me along, but there was no real sense of like, oh yeah, maybe this is one way to go through life, but not taking that next step of like, oh, what are some other ways to approach life? And so so before it was kind of like just straight and narrow of like, oh, this is how my life is, okay, let's just keep going. And then after it's kind of like, well, maybe that's one way, but like, could there be better ways? Like, how are other people living their life, and kind of expanding the view of what things could be.
Is there anything that you found to be consistent more recently about like who you are? So like, I think who you are is such a hard question to answer.
Yeah.
And I think with that innate curiosity, it's even harder to answer than somebody else who goes, you know, I got this job, you know, I got my four kids at home, I've got my business, or I go to work 9 to 5.
Yes.
Is there any part of that you do know about yourself?
If I strip away like, you know, all of the things I have, or the things I do, like internally I'm driven by that want to learn and the want to progress. I think that progression thing is one of my like really like core values. So no matter like, I can actually see a world where I could be like, let's say a cook or someone making pottery, and being satisfied enough by the feeling of progression.
So just the idea of progression doesn't have to be in any field, but just the ability to feel that progression in the process. And so when you're not feeling progression, you get disinterested by it.
Like in moments where there is a lack of progression, it's almost like there's either insufficient challenge, or I've become somehow complacent with things.
And so when you kind of have this progression as like your own quality, and you feel like this need to grow or progress, because I feel like two parts of the same coin, but how you describe it is like very, very innate and intuitive to you. So I could say, you just want to you just want to grow in life, which could be plants, whatever, but it's more for you like the progression of refining something is how I define progression. And like, you know, coming back day after day and like making progression on the thing, no different to like running, basically. Which I'm fucking surprised we haven't talked about running way more.
We're running away from the topic of running.
Which I think is probably a good thing. At least for the time being. It'll find its way back in.
All the roads lead back to running somehow.
Not running, just running. Just running.
If someone comes up to you on the street, and they're like, "Oh, Pat, who are you?" What do you say?
That's like, are you crazy or?
That's actually a tough question. Who are you? Oh shit. Let me think. Here are my notes.
It's like telling your age or your job, like, who are you? Because they're like the easiest questions.
What do you do is a lot easier.
And even like that purely from a work perspective, it's like the question is like, how are you valuable to society is basically really what you're asking. And like, if you are valuable to society, in what way? Is that like a more moral occupation? Is it a more money driven occupation? Is it like a shits and giggles operation? Like, and you just here traveling, or like what it's sort of like trying to figure out what direction you are in your life. Who am I? I am very much like you. I don't think I actually know. I think I'm innately curious about certain things. I think there's always like this internal progression of character, of like trying to find a better version of myself, and it's sort of like there's layers or levels to that, in the sense of like, I think when you're younger, or like when you first hear some sort of way of personal development, it's like, I just want to be a better person, and like just be the best version of yourself. But it's like, in what way is it purely performative? Is it from from a money perspective? Is it who you are and how you show up as your character trait or your person? And so I think it comes from like a belief of like not feeling good enough, or like a very much like quite comparative to everything else going on in the world, as opposed to so curious about everyone else and then trying to be a reflection of that, as opposed to like trying to really define, like ask a question to myself and sit with it and go, is this who I am? I think sport and exercise is probably the biggest core or fundamental that I can come back to of who I am. Like growing up, was a big supporter of footy, and was active but not nearly active enough. To now where, compared to the elite level in the world, I'm nowhere fucking close. But like compared to just about anyone that you'd meet on the street, I feel like I'd be a lot fitter and stronger than most people I'd come across. Which is a weird like space to be in.
So who are you? Then you might say, oh, I am a runner?
Yeah, I could quite easily call myself a runner. Yeah, that's probably the easiest way. Is that running from problems? I don't know. But I definitely do run on like the pavement or trails or something like that. However, it's like said, like he got injured on Wednesday and couldn't run for a couple of days. So it's like, are you still a runner at that point? And like, who am I?
Without running,
I better keep running from my problems.
The question that just came up in my mind is, are there like particular moments in your life where you remember at what point did you become curious about things? Is there a particular point at all?
I really feel like it started to change after I went to Europe. Like I was very much bad relationship. It's probably like when I lost a whole bunch of weight, because it was like the first intuitive identity shift in who I was. And then going to Europe, I never wanted to go to Europe. I was like, I wanted to do America and like do the sports stuff. And then my parents were like, go to Europe, like it'll just change your perspective. And I was like, yeah, righto. And I think going over there and seeing the different cultures and seeing the different perspectives, I was like, holy shit, like there's a different world out there. Or like, I think it's almost like the belief to like see that things could change, but also realizing that I'm not the person that could get who I wanted to be in that situation. And so I think it's like growing up, I didn't realize things could change or you could change who you wanted to be. It's probably like, I thought like you were kind of set on whatever path that you're sort of being given. It's a point where you can see things change, and then it's like, well, what is it that you want that you can't get? It's probably like the question then go, can you change that? So I was like, I want to be an NBA player. And I was like, well, I'll probably go and get that. Like 5'6", like not super fit. So I'm like, probably not going to happen. And that's like, okay, you can actually change that to start working on yourself. And I think it's a lot more external things to start with, because there are things you can see change.
I think that resonates with me a lot, and because like recently I was thinking about that cliche of like, you are the average of the 5 people you have around you, and in combination with that, like the saying of like belief precedes ability. So I think sometimes we kind of have to see examples of who we are yet to be in order to convince ourselves that like that's actually possible for ourselves. So I think one of the beautiful things about podcasting and that particular medium is like, you know, when you listen into a podcast, like it feels like you're in the room with people who you'd like to be more like. And today we have like so many choices. Like we can choose literally if we want, like if that statement is true. It's like belief precedes ability. We can choose who we would like to become more like.
Have you thought about much, like, you are the 5 people you spend the most of their time with, which is like you attract their beliefs and like ideas in the world. Do you look into who they are and why you feel like listening to them is valuable?
I think what came to mind as you asked that was I kind of pick and choose. Like I don't really dig like for example, like biographies or autobiographies, they don't really resonate with me that much. So I don't really go to the nth degree to like find out where this person came from or their precise journey. But I kind of pick and choose between like the people I encounter, of what I feel internally that I should be more like.
I think it's, and so like, you said like you feel like you want to be more like, and so you want to surround yourself with people that has like something, probably a character trait, of which you either feel like you are but don't live up to as much, or like you want to be more like. And so do you think you ever like constantly consciously check and go, what is it about this person that I enjoy listening to and their perspective on the world as not the person I want to be, but what part of who they are is the reason why I listen to them specifically? Or like if something, you know, a podcast of theirs comes on with somebody else, you're like, I might check this out.
I'm wondering whether it's like, does the content actually matter as much as how the person presents him or herself? I don't know. But I guess how do you tell what someone is like if you're not going by what they say or what they do? That's hard.
But I think that is the point, is like to listen to what they're saying and like what they believe, but then kind of try to question yourself of like, what is it that they believe?
Yeah.
So, for example, Simon Sinek is the first person that comes to mind, and it's like this belief to make the working world better, and he's got these ideas around, you know, work and how you go about things and why we do things, and purpose and rationale and leadership and stuff like that. And so there'd be a lot of people that wouldn't want to listen to him, but then it's kind of, I ask myself a little bit more of, when I come across somebody new or some person that does have an external personality, of what is it about them that I want to keep listening to them for? And this has been a very recent perspective.
Then, let's say if we're talking about Simon Sinek, then how do you think about, if you think about Simon Sinek, what of him would you like to be more like, or to have what he has? Like, how do you think about that? Like, do you think about the person, or what the person can do, or what the person has, or who the person knows? Like, are there particular slices that you see when you think about, like, let's say Simon Sinek or insert person here?
I think it's like the part of what they've been able to achieve or who they've been able to reach, but also to the idea around small parts that you get from interviews that you don't see, in the sense of like, he's on the stage or he's in the interview and he's very calm and collected and that sort of stuff, but there's like these like tangible moments where he's like, when I'm with my partner and I'm at like a ball, I'd much rather go sit in the corner and not be like a social person, but then holds these big ideas or perspectives on the world. And so like, he honestly shares parts of himself through story, basically. Like the other part was like, he's like, I've only read I've probably written more books than what I've actually read, and that's wild. Because
I only read my own books.
Yeah, but he's like, I don't even read my own books.
Oh.
He probably edits them, but
Yeah.
it's like, I think there was one, I don't know, the Diary of a CEO episode. I was like, wow, to one, to be able to admit that, and two, to have someone that has a strong perspective or view on the world, it's quite interesting.
If there was one character trait that appeals to me, or what I'd like to see of other people, it's like the ability to say I don't know. I find that very courageous.
Do you feel like you do that often?
Oh yeah, every second. I don't know. I don't know what I'm saying next.
So then, what is it that you do know?
I know that I don't know. It's an endless loop. I know that I don't know.
Just gonna repeat on that for the next half hour. I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. What do I know? Damn, it's a deep question.
Which is harder? What do I know, or who am I?
Imagine going up to someone and be like, "What do you know?" Oh shit. What do I know? Good question.
Yeah.
I know things, my brain is storing information, yes, but
what's the most
really
bullshit random fact that you think you know that's completely useless?
I was thinking about elephants. You can play games with elephants.
Okay. Yeah.
And that was probably from a recent reel of a guy standing next to an elephant, and the elephant, he was wearing a bucket hat, and the elephant uses the nose, tail, trunk to lift the hat, and then to put it in its mouth.
Yeah.
And then the guy was like, "What happened?" And then he's like, "Hey, give me my hat back." And then the elephant's like, "No," and then looks away. And then the guy's just standing there, and then eventually the elephant's like, "Urgh," and then puts it back on his head. So elephants can play games.
Yeah. That's cool. That's cool. It's amazing what comes back to you in a memory form. Of, what's kind of interesting. Yeah. In the sense of an element playing a game.
Yeah. Then, okay, so that leads to another question, which is if you could be an animal, what would your spirit animal be?
Cliche as hell. I'd definitely say a dog.
A dog.
Yeah. I think it's I just can't think of being a dolphin or a monkey or a horse roaming around. I know it's just that contentness, sense of security. I can just run around. Always friendly, always there. It's I could quite easily get a dog. It's a while I was listening to this thing that a guy was like, because I'm in an apartment, I can't have dogs. So I'm like, what's another animal I could get that's kind of cool?
Right.
And this guy just had a rabbit.
Oh.
And apparently you can teach rabbits tricks, and they sound pretty shit tricks, but he's you put your arm out and they can just jump over it.
I mean, in proportion to rabbit's height, your arm is it's pretty tall.
Yeah.
Pretty tall. Maybe half? No, not that much.
It's kind of a wild thought to think about that animals are way more almost loving and caring to you than what other people or you are to yourself. Is there a spirit animal that you identify as?
I identify as a Xerox printer. The one animal I would choose is a horse, because I think horses can be powerful in terms of raw horsepower.
As soon as I asked the question, you were like, how am I going to say this?
I've thought about this a long time. I've been waiting for this moment. Raw horsepower, but as well as the ability to be super graceful.
Okay.
I find horses really beautiful, and yet they're super strong.
Yeah.
Dad jokes. Dang.
It's good. good. I've always like wondered because like we're in your office looking at like this park,
Yeah.
and there's people that just like sit there on the grass. I'm like,
Okay.
how do you just like sit and do nothing? Like this probably comes back to
Oh,
like
how do you say and do nothing?
like full circle of like talking at the start of like, can you be content or like be okay with what you're doing or not being curious? But it's like some people are like, I just want to go to the beach and sit. Or like, there's nothing better than just sitting in the park for like 2 hours. And I'm like, I know there's probably a lot better.
Well, here's a opposing thought to that. Someone might look at you or meet you, Pat, as and then ask you the question like, how do you go running for like 12 hours continuously?
Fuck do I know? I just don't know. Like the thought of going doing that now, I'm like, I felt like it was good at one point in time.
Yeah. Not anymore? Dang.
Seasonal.
Today's a nice sunny day. Like you could just go out and come back 12 hours later and yeah. How do you sit on the grass and do nothing for 2 hours? I don't know. I'm like a bit conflicted with that thought because like on one hand, I probably would like that a lot, like just to have the space and time to like quote unquote do nothing. But on the other hand, that curiosity engine is telling me like, hey, that's unproductive.
Mm.
Yeah.
There's no progress in sitting on the grass, but then it's also like there is progress in rest and recovery and like giving time for your mind to breathe, almost, and take in ideas.
It's not a very glamorous way. It's not really like, you know, something that you can tell stories about, but like it's one of those like important but not urgent things that I find to be quite useful. I don't know what people think about or how they feel about when they sit on the grass for 2 hours, but for me, like, if I were to do that deliberately, it can be very good. Yeah.
Maybe one day.
As you said that, I was like imagining you at like 70. Maybe today's the day.
Maybe today's the day I start. I just sit in the park.
Sun's out.
I can just like imagine myself sitting on like a bar chair.
Yeah.
I'm being 70 and like someone coming up and, do you do this often? Like,
well, long time coming. Like, it's in 7 decades, you know.
Long time thinker, first time sitter.
First time ever? What? At 70? What? For real? Wow.
Taking my foot off the gas.
Huh. So, if you have 2 hours and you're not sitting on the grass doing quote unquote nothing, then how would you spend that time?
I think like that's the hardest thing to realize is the ability to just sit and do nothing. Like, I feel like my mind moves so much and has creative links that like it just jumps from one idea to the next, to the next, to the next, that it doesn't like sit. And so it almost feels like the only time I can have nothing happening in my head is like when I'm watching something, like a YouTube video or a movie, because it's not trying to create something, it's just almost looking at nothing, as opposed to being able to just sit and do nothing. Like,
right.
They're almost, I think it's a reality of constantly having to have something in my ear or listening to something or absorbing something.
So it's like, what I'm hearing is that there needs to be noise to find silence.
Yeah, or it feels like that's the only way I switch off.
Wow.
When I'm probably not actually switching off. Like, there's no time for the mind to breathe. Like, it's at the point of like, I always have to have my headphones and like my phone with me. It's like, you'd be sitting there waiting for takeout for like 5 minutes, you're like, gotta find this video, and like, and I think like that is like this internal problem, or like one of the perspectives that I've been having a lot more recently is like, if I become a dad, who I am will be what my kids see often. And so like you were the example of like how to live a life, whether that's good or not in multiple aspects. And so it's like, if you're someone that constantly is on your phone, all that sort of stuff, isn't paying attention to them, it's like probably not a good thing.
Yeah, I think the children element to it, like kind of, it's like an amplified example of like, because like children just absorb everything that they have around them as like sources of information. And maybe, yeah, I guess the child would kind of become like you no matter how you feel about it. So they'll absorb parts of you and the environment, like regardless of how you might like that or not.
And it's like they'll make up their own mind or belief around what that is.
Yeah.
Like for everyone, no matter who you come into contact with, but it's more prevalent for family. It's like the reason why they do something is either going to be the reason why they do it as well or they don't. And to be as mindful of that as you can without trying to protect them from the chaos of the world. You think about that much?
It's not daily occurrence, but I do know that being a parent is one of the ultimate objectives in my life. I can't really describe fully in logical terms of like why that thought is quite compelling, or that goal is quite compelling, but I know that is one of the things I'd like to do before I die.
Yeah.
And when it comes to parenting, like I don't know until I get there, but the fragile ideas I have at the moment is that if I were to have a child or children, I'd try to help them become more of who they are, because I'm afraid that I might come up with too many assumptions of who I want them to be, rather than letting them become who they are.
So is that like from the background of like trying to force them down a path of like engineering or like something in, I was going to say important jobs, but like something that is successful or something that gives them the level of safety, as opposed to like, so they just follow who they are internally and not try to feel the judgment of others?
Because like I feel like that fear comes from my own like journey of not really like lacking the external pressures to kind of guide me along the way when I was younger. So I developed a lot of that on my own through reading, through going through life. And I feel like when the fear of becoming a parent is like to do that too much, to kind of give too many guardrails that it's not possible to then fail or to kind of maneuver.
I think it's listening to, like, as much as I listen to podcasts, I love movies or fictional things, and it's like who people are as like a character, and like the character traits of like how someone's coming on a train. And there's like a point in like Tokyo Drift. Like,
yes, tell me more. Tokyo Drift, great topic, excellent.
It's like the point. It's like the point where like Han and I forget the guy go on top of the rooftop.
Yes.
Yeah, and it's like this quote around, "Why'd you let me drive your car?" And like, are you gonna smash? And he's like, I find it more valuable to figure out who I can trust in the character of a person than the money of what a car is. And it's like this ability to kind of figure out like why more people, how people react. And it was, this is obviously movie like picture like scene perspective, but he's like, everyone down there looking at like this crossing is like in fear, as opposed to just making a decision and not looking back. It's like, fuck.
Yeah.
Coming back to, I'm not trying to overthink too much and like trying to test some sort of thing about somebody else, like who are they? You went wild when I said Tokyo Drift.
Yeah.
What parts of Tokyo Drift are you like, oh,
oh,
the horsepower?
That's really the horsepower, but also in that scene, I can see it in my head, and it's probably that scene, like in the same scene, but like just after that, he said something about like who you let around you tells you about who you are, something like that. Wow. So, yeah.
Again, we might wrap it up there. It's been about an hour. I'm like absolutely freaking cooked. Might be a bit under an hour, but I think that
was an hour. Yeah.
That's an interesting perspective to look at, in the sense of like who you have around you is a reflection of who you are or who you want to be, and who you allow in is like a lot more important than I think what people give it credit for.
Yeah, it's I don't know whether it's hard to think about, but it's kind of like it's easier to like go with the flow, you know, and like if I could like paint a parallel universe of how my life might be like, it would be like you know, going through school, going through uni, getting a job, like kind of just following convention without questioning anything, you know, including my own like desires. Yeah, so I think it made me think about like belief precedes ability. You kind of have to want more before you can be more, something like that. Yeah, and if you don't want, then you won't see it. Yeah. I think when you spoke about Europe earlier, Europe, like going to Europe was quite formative for me as well, because my brother and I, like, we had no money as students. Like, we had enough money to like buy the tickets, and we had like $50 like backpacker like bags of like, I don't know, I think they were like 50-liter bags. So like all we carried was like on our shoulders. Like $5 jackets, ate whatever food, but we got there eventually. And when we landed in London, I still remember, like, I can play the scene in my head of like going to this suburb called Knightsbridge in London. It's one of the parts of London where a lot of like old money goes to live. So when you walk in Knightsbridge, that's where like Harrods is, I think
Hyde Park.
I don't know.
Anyway, Knightsbridge.
Yeah,
sounds
Knightsbridge.
cool.
Yeah, sounds cool. Yes, the houses are kind of like those houses where like you're so rich that you can choose to go there or not. It's like, oh, I've got a house in Knightsbridge. London's sunny today. Let's go.
Yeah.
For like an hour and then leave. House empty for like 355 days a week, whatever. A year.
And so what did that mean for you?
Like going to Knightsbridge was like, here's the story, which is when we were there was a McLaren P1 that drove past us, and my brother and I like are really into cars. It was a yellow McLaren P1 that somehow in my head I knew that car had just released maybe a few months before our trip there. So it was kind of like, oh, I saw this car on the internet. It's really cool, McLaren World Motorsports. And then seeing it on the streets, I was like, dang, like this is how people live. And that completely like reframed my mind around like what was possible. Yeah, just seeing that level of like ability, I was like, whoa, what the heck?
Yeah.
I only saw this on the internet. Like now it's here. Like what? Yeah. And that scene kind of like lives in my head as like a reminder of, yeah, like you know as much as you know because it's what's around you. But if you change your environment, the possibility completely changes, like for better or worse. Yeah.
Gives you a different perspective on the world, for sure. Like it shifts reality, like what reality actually is, doesn't exist. Like as opposed to a video game or like coming back to like the real world and going, someone's actually playing it and they got this car almost out of nothing, but it exists for them and they're able to achieve it. This is interesting what memories stick with you and which ones are important. Cool. leave it there. And hope you enjoy it.
Like, share, subscribe.